think it's first event in OWASP Austin chapter, but really glad to be with you guys. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with your community. I'm joined by my colleague, Nicole, on the call, and I do not mind you ask questions. Looks like the organizers can unmute yourself, so feel free to ask questions. My name is Baljeet. I'm the founder and CEO of Teej Lab. Before starting Teej Lab, I was a VP of research at Black Duck Software. So if you're familiar with open source usage, then perhaps you know Black Duck. I built the R&D division here in Canada. By the way, I'm based in Vancouver in Canada. Before that, I was with SAP as a research director, and again, looking into open source ecosystems across SAP products and services, essentially playing the technical due diligence role on some of the product integrations. And quite frankly, I'm not a security expert, unlike many of you. I know there's a lot of expertise on this call. I'm not a pen tester by training either. But you can think of me gaining those experiences through these associations I mentioned. My specialization is actually applying data science, data management tools on large-scale data problems. It just happens to be the case that I've been using these principles, data science technologies and tools first started with the open source risk management, and then eventually moved on to API risk management, which is today's topic. As a background, I've learned some experiences that I want to share with you. Since I started Teej Lab back in 2018-19 timeframe, when Synopsys bought Black Duck, that was my time to leave and do something which I was very passionate about from API risk management perspective. So today's talk is all about how do we look into different security issues, specifically with respect to APIs, and map them to risk-related issues. This is the agenda for the talk. Although this is an agenda, but I will use this as a roadmap. I know a lot of you are practitioners, you guys apply different tools and technologies. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions as I present. So don't hesitate to ask questions while I'm presenting. Although this is the agenda that I'll use as a roadmap, but as I mentioned, I don't mind being interrupted. So don't wait until the end of the session to ask questions. If you feel necessary, you ask the question while I'm presenting. If you want to ask through the chat, that's fine as well. If one of the organizers can grab my attention if there is any question, I don't mind answering those questions. But as an agenda, what I intend to achieve, or rather share with you today, is some of the global trends that are shaping up today's digital economy. Specifically, APIs are very, very important. You guys are the experts. You have worked with a lot of APIs. Perhaps built APIs, perhaps integrated APIs, looked into some sort of testing as well. But I want to start with some of the analytics that might inspire you further to look into this from a global perspective. Then I will go a little bit more deeper inside an enterprise ecosystem and share my thoughts with you how the API ecosystems within an enterprises look today, and what kind of risks we see in those ecosystems. And then if time permits, I will give some hands-on practical examples, but we'll see how we do on time. I'll try to keep some time for Q&A at the end, but don't wait until the last minute for those questions. So let me start with a difference that I want to highlight. You know that APIs are not new. APIs have been existing as a concept, as the computing science concept has evolved in the last decade or so. So APIs have been existing for decades and decades. My today's focus is not on the APIs that are available as a local resource, APIs connecting your memory device to, your other logical units or hardware devices and whatnot. My goal today is to talk about, APIs that are available as a service over the internet, web APIs essentially. And APIs are connecting our digital ecosystems across, our enterprise applications, social media channels, payment gateways, you name it, as depicted on this representation on this slide. So why we should care about APIs? I want to inspire you further by drawing your attention to the trends that we are observing as an API management company. So I'm drawing parallels between the growth of the web itself with the growth of APIs as well. Philosophically, APIs are nothing but provide information, very much like websites. And although APIs are essentially built for machine-to-machine communication, but at the end of the day, they provide information. You make a call, you get some, you give some inputs, you get some output back. So essentially, they provide information. If you look at this blue curve, this represents the growth of websites as we have experienced in the last 2 decades or so. Along the way, some of the great companies, technologies were built, essentially to manage that information. As an API management company, we have been tracking these APIs for almost 3-4 years, thousands of APIs from hundreds of vendors, thousands of different vendors across different industries. And although these APIs are not to the same scale, running into millions or billions, but it's just a matter of time. Every IoT device, data has already moved into the cloud, or it's moving into the cloud. Software has become services. Software is moving into the cloud. So essentially, the point I'm trying to make is all those data that you can imagine, in your real world, in your virtual world, in your digital world, wherever there is a data, there is an opportunity for you to expose that data through these REST APIs. Mostly, but there are GraphQLs, SOAP APIs, but I would say majority, you will see some of these modern technologies connecting our digital systems. So our belief is that these APIs will grow into millions and billions as well. I want you to pay attention to another number that I've listed on the right-hand side, which actually represents how much data over the internet is being communicated through these APIs. You may or may not know this, but 83% of the internet traffic is through these web APIs. I mean, that's a mind-boggling number. And that actually captures analytically the importance of these APIs. So from a risk management perspective, you can think of this, the risk that is there, because each API represents a door to your information systems. At the end of the day, when you call an API, it is essentially running a query against your database, fetching your data, returning your results. There are a lot of other smaller edge cases, but essentially that's what they do. Now, from a risk management perspective, if these APIs are compromised, having authentication, authorization problems, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. You can see the risk that is there. Theoretically, 83% from the APIs as well. As a matter of fact, organizations like Gartner, they have predicted, and of course, kudos to OWASP as an organization. You guys have done great work for API security, top 10 recommendations since 2019. All these researches and publications that we see, they are pointing to APIs are becoming an important attack surface. You know this very well. Now, from this very high level overview of global ecosystem, how it is evolving, and another pointer I want to highlight here is this 83% internet traffic is coming from enterprises, you can imagine. So in theory, you can see as enterprises build APIs, consume APIs built by others, this ecosystem will continue to evolve. Now, I want to represent, or rather grab your attention, how does an enterprise API ecosystems look today? Through our research with various prospects, our customers, and also looking into various very large enterprise API ecosystems, what we have found is your enterprise API ecosystems are already very complex. Let me explain how it is. If you look at the bottom of this figure, you see different security tools, different analytical tools. They're all connected through APIs. If you look at the right-hand side, you see API gateways, service meshes, essentially to access control your APIs. Either you are buying APIs from marketplaces, or you have built APIs that you're exposing to your customers and partners, which is listed on the left-hand side as API marketplace. So in summary, you are either an API consumer, or you are an API producer, or you are actually both. If you move up in this diagram, you see different stakeholders. Not only just developers or engineers who are building APIs, integrating APIs, but also licensing colleagues, procurement teams, compliance teams, M&A due diligence teams, and also your communities, researchers, your developers who are depending on your APIs. So the enterprise API ecosystem that you can imagine is already very complex, not just because of the APIs, but also the processes, different stakeholders, different policies, all the way from having open APIs, all the way to monetizing your APIs. So your enterprise API ecosystem is very complex. Now, from this 30,000 high-level overview, I want to take you inside even deeper in this ecosystem, why this ecosystem is complex. And what I've learned over a number of years, that risk is all about your prioritization. You know this, I know this, that there is never a day when you say that your risks are gone, disappeared. Risk is all about prioritization. You have problems, you got to manage them. And part of the challenge is the nomenclature of the API itself in this ecosystem is quite complex. Companies are trying to figure out what's internal, what's external, and on top of that, there are certain APIs that you don't even know. So as listed on this slide, let's try to put some nomenclature around these APIs. So external APIs could be those APIs that you're consuming from your external customers and partners. But external APIs could also be those APIs that you have built to expose to your customers and partners for free, for monetization, whatever reasons you may have. But you still need to manage the inventory. You still need to manage who owns these APIs. You still need to have policies. You need to have controls, all that you need to manage your APIs from a risk perspective. If you look at the middle, internal APIs could be APIs that you built for your internal teams. A lot of organizations essentially have taken this digital transformation journey where they're trying to break their data silos across their different business units by building these APIs for seamless integrations. Oftentimes we see our colleagues shipping data through Dropboxes or sending through emails. I mean, that's a very inefficient way to create products or collect analytics and whatever you need to do. So companies are building internal APIs for, if not partners or customers, but just their own internal streamlining their processes or accelerating their product and innovations. But internal APIs could also be those APIs that your partner has provided to you with a request that, look, these are not my public APIs. I've just built it for you because you don't want my GUI, you don't want my dashboard, you just want to bypass all that and integrate those APIs. But be careful, don't publish these APIs, don't expose my APIs to anybody else. So your obligation to protect these APIs are even greater. So as you can see that what is internal, what is external, what is free, what is paid, it's all confusing. On top of this, you could have APIs that you do not even know exist. Now you may ask, how is that possible? You are familiar with open source usage. When I ran the R&D for Black Tech software, we had learned, 80 to 90% of the applications are built using open source. You guys being one of the contributors to the open source community, you guys know how it is. Any application you pick, there is an open source usage. So oftentimes what is happening is these projects, they're also providing their own API integrations, even for single sign-on purposes. But nonetheless, a developer may download a library for one purpose, but not necessarily knowing there are certain API integrations. Maybe they're not using them. It's just sitting there, but has the potential to be exploited for various reasons. On top of that, you may be buying companies, you may be acquiring assets from other organizations. And I've seen various cases in which these APIs may come into bulk in your ecosystem, where you do not know who the vendors are these free APIs, what are the rate limits. So all those issues come into play from a risk management perspective. So let me take a quick pause here to see and also get some feedback. Am I going too slow, too fast? Anybody can provide feedback, or if anybody has any question, let me take a quick pause. Any question?
Anybody? Nobody in the room, apparently. You're doing good. Thanks, man.
All right, thank you. So hopefully this global view and also the enterprise view have given you some more insights from what you already know, how these APIs are posing different challenges to enterprises, not just looking into the security issues, but also the risk management issues. But let me give you another dimension to these APIs. I don't want you to look at these APIs only from an asset perspective, that these are my APIs, part of my product, also doing some integrations across my products and services. But I also want you to look at these APIs from a data sovereignty perspective as well. As I mentioned in the very beginning itself, these APIs are transacting data. So look at these APIs from data as well. And it's very easy for any DevOps team to spin off an instance, put an application which has an API, and that server may be hosted somewhere in a location where you may have certain obligations with respect to your compliance processes. And you may actually not even know that this has happened, because the URL or URI may remain the same when you are accessing those resources through when you are integrating those APIs. So you may never find out. So from a data sovereignty perspective, APIs are posing certain challenges, as shown on this. This is a real snapshot of an API ecosystem that we capture, where each dot represents an API that is hosted in that particular location, a vendor or a service or both. Now let me turn my attention to API risks. Now, API risks obviously are coming from the fact that these APIs may get compromised or are already compromised. So we are familiar with OWASP top 10 recommendations, thanks to OWASP. But I want to go a little bit more deeper on some of those recommendations and share some more insights from our research perspective. These are some of the examples you may be familiar with. We are seeing lots and lots of these cases. Now, this is already old. I'm capturing 2021, but as you know, we are in 2023, so there are more cases that you may be familiar with. But the point I'm trying to make is the attack surface is increasing. Every time you built an API or you used an API, connecting your products with other products and services, there is a risk of this APIs being compromised. Now, this is a particular API problem that we captured. In this particular case, so these are some of the issues that were available in the public domain, but this is something we captured. In this case, of course, I'm hiding some of the information, but in this particular case, this particular API was leaking credit card information. Not just the credit card numbers, but also security codes or the codes that will actually allow us to do live transaction. Obviously, we should not be seeing this data. Maybe from a design perspective, the developers thought by just spitting out all the data in one single JSON format, they can accelerate the process. Whoever needs to use this data, they can do the transaction faster or whatever it is. I don't know what the reason was, but we should not be accessing this information. Nonetheless, we did the responsible disclosure, and the vendor was able to act upon it very quickly. So we wanted to understand this now at a much larger scale. What's happening at the global scale? We knew that the problems are coming up, but we wanted to do a bit more on this and wanted to understand a global perspective, what's happening on a larger scale. So here is the summary of the research we did almost a year and a half ago. And the summary here is, we looked at almost a decades of NVD data, national vulnerability data. You guys know that, you guys maybe have contributed to NVD. Now, you must ask this question. NVD does not only have API specific issues, right? So they have all kinds of vulnerabilities being reported. So what we did was, through various NLP techniques, as you know, when a vulnerability is reported, there is a description, there are a lot of other metadata that is available. So we applied different NLP, different data mining techniques to mine this data to identify specific API problems. So the next question was, which API specific problem? So now, again, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So we took OWASP top 10 recommendations, and we started mapping these API specific problems to OWASP top 10 recommendations, authentication, authorization, and other kinds of problems, even going beyond OWASP recommendation. The interesting observation, as summarized on this slide, is the top two problems we identified through this analytical research was the authorization and authentication problem. So what OWASP was recommending, what we independently validated, made sense. As you know, the authentication authorization also show up in OWASP top 5 recommendations. Broken access authorization, and the difference between authentication authorization, just to refresh your memory, I know you are the expert, just because you are authorized, that does not necessarily mean you have access to all the resources. So the top problem we found was the authorization layer was broken. A lot of APIs we saw were without any authentication, but people thought that this is just my internal API, or people thought, oh, this API is not transacting any important information, so I should not have any authentication. But as you know, this is not a good practice. So the summary here is, the top problem we found, as depicted by the frequency here, the number of vulnerabilities that we could map to authorization and authentication problems, were the top two problems. And the challenge here is, authorization, as you guys know, is always a business logic most of the time. You have different authentication frameworks in place, but then who gets access to what resource essentially is written through a logic. Sometimes frameworks provide you those logics, but oftentimes you have to customize, you have to write a piece of code. And we found a lot of issues where these authorization layers were broken. I'm not going to go into detail. As I mentioned, you guys are the experts. You know what I'm talking about, what are the injection issues and all that. I'm not going to go into detail. The point I'm trying to make in today's session is, not every API security problem leads to same business risks. Okay, if two APIs have broken authentication problems, do they lead to the same businesses? The answer is no, and I will explain that why, and perhaps you can intuitively understand why that is the case. But let me take a quick pause again to see. I'm seeing some chat in the chat window, but looks like there is no question. All right, so moving along. Now, we wanted to understand how these different security issues with these APIs may lead to different risks to organizations. And the intent here was, can we map those security issues to specific business risks and whatnot? Before I go there, this session was also about building a kind of a process so that we can discover those issues. And I just want to quickly go through this process that we believe would be helpful to us before I jump into the risk categorization. So as a process, if you want to discover some of these issues that I'm talking about, the very first challenge you have is to discover your APIs and the issues around those APIs. Now, discovery here does not necessarily mean that the APIs that you already know, but also the APIs that you don't know. So now the challenge is, if you don't know your APIs, then how do you even solve this problem? Let alone, finding the security issues or legal issues or other compliance issues. So this is one of the challenges we saw, where we identified that the current SCA tools or current static analysis tools cannot actually solve this problem. So we had to build certain tools to actually do the discovery. And discovery means finding your unknown APIs that I listed on one of my slides. But once you find those APIs, then the goal is for you to perhaps apply some of the practices that you put in place, doing some testing, discovering, issues around authentication, authorization, or seeing how these APIs can be attacked, different injection codes and whatnot. So the idea is to find your security issues, licensing issues, or other technical issues. And it's not just a one-time process. Since APIs by nature, they are very dynamic. You cannot just do this one-time due diligence, because the underlying database may evolve, your processes may change, your DevOps environment may change. So you need to track these issues on a continuous basis. And you have to alert different stakeholders. As I mentioned on one of my slides, the enterprise ecosystem from a stakeholder perspective is very complex. So it's not just the security folks or the risk management folks, but also other colleagues like licensing colleagues or M&A colleagues or other people you need to inform as part of your risk management process. And last but not the least, you have to make recommendations. The recommendations could be as simple as, okay, why this API is hosted there, or this API has a broken authentication, or why this particular user is able to access this particular API, because this is supposed to be an admin API or other case. So you have to make appropriate recommendations as part of this process. So very quickly, I went through this process. I'm not trying to claim this is the best process in the world. That's not my intent, but you get the point. You have to find your APIs. That's where your journey starts from, even for security issues, because you may not be able to find the security issues if you don't even know all your API inventory. So discovering APIs is a very, very important piece. And I'm glad to share with you, perhaps some of you already know, with consistent effort, I've been talking about this discovery issue since 2019. And glad to see that in 2023, OWASP has actually adopted inventory management as part of their OWASP top 10 recommendations specific to APIs. So you can see the importance that the community is giving to discovery. You can call it whichever name you want, inventory management, but the idea is you need to find your APIs. You need to find your APIs across your products and services. And those hidden APIs are the challenge. And the problem is the scalability, because we are not talking about one API, 2 APIs, or 10 APIs. We are talking about hundreds and perhaps thousands of APIs within one single organization. I've seen cases where thousands of APIs in one single product, let alone all the products of a company. So discovery is the message here. So glad to see that the OWASP has adopted as part of their OWASP API specific recommendations since 2023. So what kind of analytics we need? We essentially need to not only track the inventory, but also on each of those APIs you discover, you have to collect certain metrics. For example, what's the category of those APIs? Because essentially you want to categorize those APIs across different dimensions. As I mentioned, risk is all about prioritization. If you have hundreds of problems, then which one you want to attack first? Very much similar to CVSS score that you guys use for your prioritization purposes. So finding the age of those APIs. And another important pointer I want to provide here is a lot of APIs are being built as open APIs. I'm not talking about open API standard. I'm talking about APIs available publicly as open for you to consume. Just like software became open source, APIs are becoming open APIs. A lot of companies are building their ecosystem around it because, you know, organizations, they want intelligence. They do not necessarily want your heavy GUI dashboards, but they want intelligence that can be delivered through APIs. So categorizing your APIs, tracking their age, functions, what do they do, what kind of vulnerabilities they have, and quality issues, licensing issues. Licensing is another topic that perhaps is an important topic, especially for security folks. You know, your focus is always on security, but looking at certain risks from a licensing point of view is very, very important. And the difficulty there is, from a risk management point of view, APIs oftentimes are not governed by licenses. We are all familiar with Apache, MIT licenses, and we know how to use open source, embed into our applications, especially enterprises. You know, they know how to risk classify their risks. But APIs are very much rooted in the usage of data, so there are no fixed set of licenses. As you know, there are terms of services, developer agreements. In some cases, we have seen API-specific terms of services as well, where there are a lot of risks around how do you use those APIs, under what conditions you use. And you cannot blame the developers not to have the fixed licenses simply because, you know, the new laws may come, new regulations may come, and they have to constantly evolve these legal documents. So there are a lot of risks from licensing perspective as well. Now, the heart of this presentation was about how do we actually classify these different risks. Once we discover a authentication problem, authorization problem, and we got to fix it, you know, as a security practitioner or a pen tester, you got to report this problem and somebody has to fix it, or you have to fix it. But during the same time, as we recognize the fact that if there are hundreds of such problems, which one we want to solve first? And in some cases, you may not even have control over those APIs because these are the APIs that you did not build. So how do we classify these issues into some sort of business risk? So here is the attempt that is summarized here. So the very first category of API risks that I've listed here is security issues. And they're very straightforward. You know, there is an authentication issue, APIs are compromised, and you know that there is a hardcore security problem, you got to fix it. So you have to prioritize based on how severe it is, depending on the nature of the API, how critical this API is, you know, you have to decide all that. The legal risk is if this API is dealing with, let's say, customer information, okay? And that too, you have hundreds and thousands and perhaps millions of customers. The legal risk here is customers are not going to like it. And oftentimes, if this leads to a legal action, then the risk is all about, oftentimes, the compensation comes down to the dollar value. Each data item can be quantified in terms of what's the damage done. So you can do the math, you can multiply that number with millions of customers. You're looking at a legal suit where, you know, this is leading to either a lawsuit or some other issues depending on what data was compromised. The financial risks are also a bit tedious to understand, or rather acknowledge, because we often think that it's just the API that is transactor dollar value has financial impact, but that's not always the case. Let me give you an example. Let's talk about a media company that depends on API, a social media API, let's say tweets. For that company, each tweet has a dollar value, right? If that API shuts down, it's not just the the payment credit card integration that has impacted their bottom line. But it's in this case, if the feeds are broken or any kind of information that is actually creating the actual real value for them, you can see the impact on their bottom line. Similarly, operational risks, they're not very straightforward. I actually have an interesting story to share very quickly. As I mentioned in my introduction, I was part of a team that was responsible for conducting technical due diligence. And we were responsible, anytime a company was bought, we would go perform technical due diligence. And our role was we would apply different SCA tools, different other kinds of tools and processes, working with our lawyer colleagues to mitigate the risks from a security, from a licensing, other aspects. In one such case, we had bought this company, and this was a very high transaction, over $1 billion or so. Once we bought this company, 6 months down the road, we came to know that this application was choking. And ultimately, we found out that there was the set of APIs that were hitting the rate limits, and also their responses, their JSON response format had changed, which was essentially breaking down this API and bringing the entire application down. The long story short is, we didn't have any security problem immediately. We didn't have any licensing issue immediately, but it was an operational nightmare. We had to bring this application down. All the due diligence we conducted, we had to redo it over again. And believe it or not, in that one particular product, we found 5,000 or so different unaccounted APIs. We had no idea who the vendors were. We had no idea, do we have an agreement with them? And the difficulty was, we had bought a startup, very cool solution, a SaaS product. Essentially, that's why we paid $1 billion. But many of these APIs, they were not running in a larger ecosystem. Now, suddenly this solution became part of a larger ecosystem. The rate limits needed to be needed to change. Basically, the solution needed to scale to a larger ecosystem. So the long story short is, a lot of issues came up. We didn't have security issues, but we lost the credibility in terms of, and eventually you can imagine that has also led to financial losses. Ultimately, we had to perform the due diligence again. All the money we spent on the due diligence, it was redone again, and all the other issues. Regulatory issues are also very much similar to operational risks. They come on a longer horizon. For example, you have a compliance goal because you're launching a product, and auditors want to know where all the data is stored. Now suddenly you find out there is an API that is somewhere hosted on a server, even if it's a single sign-on API, that is using email or storing email. Now you have an issue. The process is delayed. You're not launching a product, so regulatory issues can hit you over a longer period of time as well. If you want to know more about some of the best practices, actually, Canadian government has a very good booklet. I'm sure there are a lot of other literature available. You guys are experts in the security issues, but I recommend this, some of the best practices that are listed on the link here. And also our own resource. We have a API knowledge base. This is world's largest API knowledge base. We are tracking thousands and thousands of APIs across different products and services, across different industries, from thousands of vendors. Some of the other repositories are also listed here, but they are not necessarily focused on the security and compliance perspective. So if you like what I presented, if you want to go dig more deeper and look at some of those APIs, and we actually need your help. So if you have certain APIs that you want this to be part of this knowledge base that is available freely to all our community members, feel free to add those APIs into this repository. And speaking of the repository, although we are tracking roughly 50,000 or so APIs, but as you can imagine, we are not having 50,000 APIs only. It's much, much more on that. We had done some estimation that there are already 1 million APIs available on the public repos, across different geographies. But just the AI or the machine learning or the data crawling functionality cannot solve this problem, because even if you bring an API into the ecosystem, then still authentication cannot be automated. You have to put an API key or different tokens that you have to provide. So all those interesting challenges are there. But nonetheless, all the APIs, 50,000 or so that we have integrated, they are functional. It's not just a static repository. You can see what those APIs, what data they transact, what are the inputs, what are the outputs. So there is an interesting discoveries you can make on this repo. This is the link to the portal. If you are interested to learn more, you can sign up today. You can sign up later after this session, but you can check out some of those links over our website, and feel free to use the resources that are listed here. Now, let me summarize what we discussed today. So APIs are engine to digital transformation for organizations. This is a good time, if you have not looked into these API issues from a risk management perspective, this is a good time to look into those issues. APIs also pose certain management or governance challenges. As I mentioned, not every API security problem leads to same business impact. So you got to find out this is a problem. And the issue is the scalability. The issue is thousands of APIs that you may have in your products and services in your organization. And I also shared a process that you can put in place, and discovery is very important aspect of that auditing or risk management process, whatever you want to call that. And I'm just saying, dog eat your own food. So great that OWASP has made this recommendation, and so far these are the best industry practices that a lot of organizations are putting in place. But this is a constantly evolving space, as you can imagine. And I've also shared some of our own resources or some of the other publicly available resources, so feel free to check them out. This is my contact information. I'm not sure how much more time still we have, but I'm happy to take a quick pause here. If anybody has any question, or if organizers believe we have still a few minutes, I can give a quick demo as well. So back to you for your thoughts, and I'm happy to answer any questions that we have from the audience.
So if anybody wants to unmute online too, they can ask a question. Anybody have any questions in the room right now? No one's raising hands in here, so anybody online want to unmute and ask a question? We have, I believe, about 5 minutes left. I don't know if you have, is that time enough for your demo real quick, or is that insufficient?
I can do a quick demo.
Y'all want to stick around and see that? What is the product? Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so I'm going to do a quick demo. So I'm going to show two problems. We may not have time to see all the problems. So I want to talk about two problems, the discovery issue and then the technical or the due diligence process. So this is the sign up page. If you haven't signed in, you can sign in using the sign up button. You can use your
You're still showing us your slide deck.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, my apologies. So let me stop sharing and reshare again. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, now we can, thanks.
Okay, so since you didn't see the sign up page, so this is the sign up page. You can sign in using Google or Microsoft emails using single sign on, or you can create with the sign up page as well, where you provide your information. So since I already have an account, I'm going to sign in. And as I mentioned, I want to talk about the discovery issue. And part of the challenge is sometimes you don't know your APIs across your products and services. So you can apply a shift left approach where you are scanning your applications as those applications are being built. As I mentioned, a lot of us use open source. So it would be nice to see what's already embedded or integrated in those libraries. So I'm going to show you quickly one use case. We may not have time to scan this, but I'm just gonna show you an example where I've already scanned something. So here I scanned this IoT application built by Google. This is on their GitHub page. I actually scanned some of the OWASP pen testing tools as well. You guys put it on your GitHub pages, but here I'm just gonna show this Google example. So what you're seeing here is I scanned this library, and you can see some of the metadata, who scanned it, when it was scanned, where it was scanned from. And the important part is this discovery piece. So I'm seeing here where exactly these APIs might be integrated. So I'm seeing in this file, there is a call to a Google, some Google API. You can see where exactly those are integrated. In some cases, if it is not able to find the exact discoveries, it will capture different methods which indicate that there is an API integration. So this is one piece where you can shift left. The other piece is once you do the discovery, we have a similar kind of process that can run on the network. So discovering APIs by scanning your network, because sometimes you may not even have access to source code. You cannot even scan applications because of legacy issues and whatnot. The other thing that I want to showcase is we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We didn't want to, just perform different security tests. We said, okay, let's adopt OWASP top 10 recommendations and see all the APIs we are curating from the internet. We have a large AI engine that is collecting this information, and also community members can add their APIs and run these test cases. So we automated these OWASP top 10 tests where you can onboard an API and essentially run these test cases. And once you run these test cases, it generates a report where you can see, okay, what was broken with these APIs. So I'm just going to quickly show you a report, but of course, I encourage you to run this live. And in this case, the report is a very simple report which lists all the test cases that I ran, which test cases it passed, which test cases it failed, and you can customize some of these test cases. The idea is not to reinvent the wheel, but can we automate this? Because the problem is it's not just one API, two APIs, right? It's hundreds and thousands of APIs. And we can't blame the developers if there are certain design issues with these APIs. So the idea is once your API is built, can you do some automation that already based on the best practices or principles that already exist, can you automate to do some benchmarking and whatnot? I have a lot of other things to talk about, but I think you get the point. To summarize again, discovery is where you start, but that's not where it ends. You got to discover your unknown APIs even, you got to find all the security issues, licensing issues, and the categorization is very important as well. And when I say categorization, I do not necessarily mean that you have only one way to categorize them. You can categorize them along different industries. You can categorize based on different vendors you have. You can categorize based on different business unit, but you got to categorize them, because once you categorize, then discovery becomes much easier process, because it's not just you are doing those due diligence work, but also developers or your API consumers who are consuming those APIs, they need to look into those issues in a more straightforward way. So that was my quick demo, but hopefully that gave everybody a good chance to what I'm talking about as an overall picture. But I'm happy, there is 1 minute left. Happy to give a pause again and see if anybody has any questions.
Don't see anybody in the room raising their hand for anything. Oh, I do have somebody. Yes, there's a question in the back.
Hello, sir. I have a question on the trends. And I'm trying to figure out how to formulate this question. So let's say earlier you said, you mentioned there was around 80% of the traffic on the internet is going to be utilizing APIs. Was that correct?
83%.
Yeah, gotcha. Now, have you seen on your last slide, you did mention it had the OWASP, like let's say the categories, meaning SQL injections, the buffer overflows. Let's say, hey, I want to hire someone to attack this thing, and there's a market share for people that can do buffer overflows. There's a market share for people that can do SQL injections. Now, when it comes to APIs, in the next 5 to 10 years, do you see a drastic increase in that market for people that can attack APIs versus the other categories? Hopefully that made sense. I'm sorry.
It does. And the short answer, yes. By nature, APIs are like boxes. You give certain inputs and you get certain output back. So technically, by design itself, they're prone to injection attacks. There are APIs. I've seen a lot of APIs that are AI-driven APIs. For example, speech processing, image processing. So you give us a sample of a speech to convert English to French or whatever. You convert images. So what if you're able to, if you're not sanitizing your inputs, they are prone to attacks. You can inject different codes, SQL codes, and other kinds of codes. So by design itself, APIs are prone to these attacks. The other issue you mentioned is, are these attacks going to be, are increasing? It's not just us who's saying this, but also Gartner has predicted 90% of the web applications will be attacked through APIs. I could be wrong by saying 90 or 92%, but they have a specific number that they have done research on. And yes, so by nature, authentication authorization we understand, but also from an injection point of view, these APIs are more prone to attacks. So you need better mechanisms to sanitize your inputs and look at some of those issues. Yeah, so hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, I did. Thank you.
All right.
I'm seeing Michael in the audience. Hey, Michael, how are you? Michael.
Hey, Baljeet, how are you? Doing well.
Good, man. Good to see you. Are you based in Austin?
No, I'm in Boston, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay, all right.
Thank you
Yeah.
for
Good to see you.
Thank you. Well, I think this wraps up the Austin chapter meeting then. Thank you all for everyone attending. We'll see you all next month, and hopefully we'll also see you at the happy hour on the 13th in Austin. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again. Thanks for the opportunity. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.
Excellent.